everybody. I can see people are starting to come in. Elisa, Boris, Sylvie, good to see you. Angelica, thank you very much for joining us. We'll give it a couple of minutes. Hello, Elaine, how are you? Just to allow people to join, we've got 100 people signed up, and we usually hit about half that. So thank you very much indeed for coming in. The just usual bit of housekeeping. You can put any questions to Gordon or myself by using the Q&A, which you'll see at the bottom of the screen, or using the chat box, which you can do at the side. A short aside, if you did want us to include the questions with the recording, the question report with the recording, then please put them into the Q&A, because that enables me to download a CSV file and send that to you as well. But you're very welcome to use the chat box. So on a very auspicious day in so many ways, with European countries going into lockdowns and not least a very close to call US election, we're going to focus on the other great unknown of our time, which is Brexit. And for those of you who've been following our briefings on this, you all know that Gordon is our expert on this. And also, Gordon, you read incredibly widely, and you're also a very sharp political commentator. So thank you again for being with us. I will start this off by saying Gordon and I had a conversation over the weekend. It's like Gordon said, and in fact, I heard you just on a call with Tad, and you said, if something big doesn't happen in 41 minutes, we're going to have a not very interesting session, because things have stalled. So first of all, can you just recap on where the general big picture?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Tom. Well, the big picture is that on 31st December, just a few weeks away now, we end the transition period, the Brexit transition period. And that means that from 1st January, if there is no deal, if the current negotiations end in stalemate, then we will not have a free trade agreement between the UK and the European Union, and tariffs and other non-tariff barriers will come into effect. But the UK will just be like any third country trying to deal with the European Union. So negotiations were meant to be completed by initially mid-October, then end October. Things got very bad-tempered. I think the last time we spoke in this forum was late September, and at that time I was quoting what both sides were saying, and you could tell that they were getting quite bad-tempered about it. And if anything, it got worse. I mean, we had the situation maybe just 2 or 3 weeks ago where the UK government, Boris Johnson specifically, said, look, there's no point in talking now. We'll just get on with our no-deal arrangements. So things were going really badly. What we now have is everyone is around the table. There seems to be complete radio silence about what's happening. No leaks, no announcements. And that suggests actually that both sides have decided, okay, this is serious now. Right. We're on the verge. Let's get down to working out what we're going to do. You know, we've got a few areas that have caused us problems. We've shouted at each other. Let's see one final effort to sort these things out. And really, in practice, it has to be done, if not this week, then certainly by next week. It's that close in terms of just how long it then takes to have an agreement between negotiators turned into something that becomes law, and that, of course, businesses in the UK and in the European Union have time to respond to, you know, whatever the new rules, the new forms, any tariffs there are, whatever these things are, you know, they can't just be decided on the 31st of December. So the feeling is that certainly by this time next week, we will definitely know what the outcome is, deal or no deal.
So a couple of things that sort of occur to me. In terms of the political will to get this done, are there divisions within the UK government and within the European Union?
There are two main headings on which things got really bogged down and are possibly being unpicked as we speak now. One is this phrase that's used called the level playing field. And this is the European Union saying to the UK, if you want a free trade agreement with us, then you must still comply with some of our fundamental EU rules. For example, about state aid. You can't just subsidize a company in the UK so that it can compete unfairly with a company in France or Spain. And it also applies to things like, let's say, food regulations, any areas where you could undercut the European Union. If the UK decided, as I'm sure they wouldn't, but if they did decide to have lower standards of food production, but it could be lower standards in the whole area of health and safety, environmental regulations, that kind of thing. So that whole area of where they call, they use this expression, level playing field, that's what that's all about. European Union is absolutely adamant. UK government has been saying, well, we will be a sovereign state from 1st January. Why should we have to tie in with your regulations? You've done a free trade agreement with Canada. It doesn't have any of these level playing field things. European Union says, yeah, but you're on our doorstep, therefore we need to know that you're not going to be undercutting us in these ways. So that is a pretty fundamental area, and we get the impression that progress is now being made, because it is all about where you draw the line of a compromise between that absolute EU view and the UK view. And the other big topic, and this one in a sense is a little bit crazy because it's such a small part of the EU and the UK economies, and that's fishing rights. And this is one in particular where, you know, the UK ministers have made promises to the UK fishing industries and fishing communities that once we leave, once Brexit happens, then we won't have these pesky foreigners fishing in our waters. And, you know, that was part of the whole Brexit argument. From the European point of view, and this is particularly France and Spain also, who are very strong that no, we must have continuing rights to fish in UK waters. And their big negotiating position is that 70% of British fish is sold into EU markets, and therefore you cannot have a situation where we exclude completely the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, and expect to have tariff-free sales of fish into their marketplaces. So again, you can't imagine that there's not a compromise that can be worked out, you know, sure, placing limits or, you know, somehow sorting this one out, because it should be in both sides' interest to reach an agreement. But it was one of these things that was, you know, really strong in principle, and as I say, part of the Brexit argument. You know, we will protect our fishing communities, and the EU has been a disaster for fish and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's now coming back to haunt some of the UK government ministers who made these arguments as part of why we should leave the EU.
I mean, look, I totally understand the anti-competitive nature of not going into, you know, agreements about things like that. But I just find it, I've said it before and I'll say it again, it beggars belief to me that an industry as small as the fishing industry is having a sway over enormous industries like manufacturing, cars, tariffs. Anyway, we'll come back to that. So the big question then looks as if things are happening behind the scenes. There's radio silence. Will there be a deal?
I would put it 60-40 at the moment that there will be a deal. I think just, firstly, it's such a huge problem for both the European Union and the UK if we go our separate ways without a deal. You know, the damage to the economies will be huge. So you just get the impression that the negotiators have now been told, okay, do a deal. Let's stop all the trash talking around it, let's see what we can come up with. Now, I mean, there are really three things that could happen. One is no deal, of course. Secondly, there could be the kind of full integrated deal that the European Union have always insisted upon, that covers everything from, you know, the Irish border right through to the absence of tariffs and customs arrangements, etc. The third possibility, which maybe is more likely now, is that the negotiators do just enough to have some kind of skeleton agreement or almost kind of interim agreement that means that on the 1st of January, we don't have this schism and real economic problems, but that there is an outline agreement and that talks effectively continue into next year where different aspects of it are fleshed out in more detail. So the risk of no deal definitely remains, but it does look as if we're getting closer to some kind of deal being hammered out.
I mean, certainly from a very sort of UK limited perspective, there's been an awful lot of preparation in case of a no deal. On the major motorway that leads down to the Channel Tunnel, there's what's been called the Farage Garage, which I think is hilarious. Nigel Farage was a very prominent pro-Brexit campaigner. And this is the lorry park where they're expecting, you know, while tariffs are imposed. But this is all hopefully conjecture. So, Gordon, we've talked before about the internal market legislation, the UK's internal market legislation. That's a big thing in terms of standing in the way of a deal, right?
Yeah, that was the hand grenade that had just been thrown into the talks. Again, going back to when we were speaking in September, and there was genuine outrage from various quarters about what the UK was trying to do. And just to recap on that, the way it impacted on the negotiations was that it allowed the UK government to disregard parts of the withdrawal agreement, which we've already entered, which covers our withdrawal from the marketplace, and in particular, it agreed that instead of having any arrangements, customs arrangements on the island of Ireland, there would be customs checks in place between the UK, or rather Great Britain and Northern Ireland, so in the Irish Sea, within the UK, rather than creating this border in Ireland. So it did create some outrage when the UK brought in this new legislation. And even we had Joe Biden making reference to it. So it was pretty uncomfortable for the UK government. The EU have actually raised a technical legal action against the UK for breach of an international treaty, though that would take years to go through the courts. But having done that and made the outrage noises, I think the EU have been quite clever here. Basically, they've then said, well, we will continue with the negotiations. Let's leave that now to stick to the wall. Let's not allow this to get in the way of a free trade agreement if one can be reached. So actually, I think the European Union have been quite mature about this. If things fall apart, then it will be one of the many things that will cause problems. And as I say, if Joe Biden becomes president, then it's something he felt very strongly about too. Apparently he has some Irish background, which adds to the flavor of things. So it was a problem at the time, but in terms of what we're talking about today, these free trade negotiations, No, it's just been noted, but then they're getting on with things. So,
I mean, it was just extraordinary back when they announced that, and there was some fantastic phrase like, "We can break the law in a sustainable and limited way." And I mean, we were all just like, "Oh, can we? Oh, that's good. Then I don't have to apply to lockdown. Then I can still go to the pub. Thank you very much." So the other phrase that, I mean, like you, listening to different radio news, the phrase, I think it was 2 weeks ago, "leaving on Australian terms" was brought out in this incredibly positive way from our government. Here we go, we can leave on Australian terms. That sounds great, doesn't it? Can you dig into that for us?
It's almost like, so the deal that the UK is looking for is a Canada-style deal. And that is genuine. That is based on the Canadian Free Trade Agreement. So it's almost like a bit of Boris Johnson's spin. Well, let's think of a sunny country which doesn't have an arrangement with the EU. So we'll call it an Australian-style deal. But in fact, it's not entirely even true, because there are some arrangements in place on specific areas between Australia and the EU. And Australia does want to negotiate a free trade agreement with the EU. So, it's a bit like, you could have called it the Afghanistan or the Bhutan, or, it's just playing with words, really. If we leave without a deal, it will be on World Trade Organization terms, and we will have tariffs in place with our biggest trading partner. So it's Australian agreement is just really silly words.
It made me so angry, because it was like almost designed to fool people into thinking this was a good thing. We like Australia. They make great wine. They're a next colony. That's great. But for heaven's sake, that was tantamount to a blatant lie, in a way, to try and fool people into. I was listening to a radio phone and people going, "Oh, but it's great, we'll be like Australia." I was thinking, yes, that doesn't mean it.
Actually, Don, it does remind me that was used once before too, when the new immigration system was introduced. And instead of just talking about a points-based system, which many countries use, it was an Australian system. I'm sure it's something to do with sunshine.
It's got to be. So, here we are with Australia. No, I've got that on the brain. With European countries going into lockdowns left, right, and centre. I know Netherlands go in the end of this week. We are Germany, Belgium, France. How much worse are things going to get if we have no deal economically?
Yeah, in fact, I was just checking the latest stats on that. So we've got the UK government's own modelling. So this should be the conservative estimate of any hit that the UK is going to take. Their current one is that after 15 years, we would be about 8% worse off in GDP terms with no deal. That compares, if we got a very basic Canadian style deal, we'd be 5% worse off. So even, the best predictions are not good. But it's when you drill down, instead of just looking at GDP as a whole, you look at particular industries. And so, for example, the car industry, the figures there, it's the tariffs on cars would be 10% and 5% on car parts. Now that's an industry which in the UK employs 800,000 people. So that is an enormous risk that the UK would be taking. Food industry too, farmers, they would be facing 40% EU tariffs on things like beef and lamb. So, potential devastation in UK agriculture. And also UK food prices. So it's not just producers, actually consumers in the UK, the average food price would be increasing by 4%. Again, these are meant to be conservative estimates. On the EU side of things, it's not quite as bad. except Ireland. Ireland would really be in the front line and would be taking a GDP hit that was quite substantial. But again, if you drill down into specific sectors, you look at things like German car industry, for example. It's really bad news for them if there are tariffs on cars and car parts between the UK and the EU. So yeah, bad for everyone. And you know, for this to be happening at a time of a pandemic just would seem like madness. But so again, let's hope that these are worst scenarios that don't come to fruition. But it is interesting that even on the Canada-style arrangement that we're looking for, there will be an impact, anticipated impact on the UK's GDP.
Thank you for the questions that are coming through in the chat box. We will get through to those. And as I say, if you've got questions, pop them in the chat box and put them in the Q&A. So Gordon, can you update us on how Brexit is going to affect our industry, relocation services in particular?
Yeah, I'm always looking out for any new angles on that may impact on relocation. There's one that I've probably not highlighted before, but it will affect some relocation companies, and that is this idea that you have to have a representative in an EU country for data protection compliance purposes. So let's say if you're an American relocation management company, you've got a UK office, and that's your only office in the EU. If you are selling your services into the EU, then you will now need either to open an office in an EU country or have an EU representative. And that could be a law firm in Munich or Paris, or you know, it could be an individual who is prepared to take on that role. And that is your data protection person who would receive complaints and deal with the data protection authorities in individual countries. And one thing that companies will have to be aware of is if, for example, you only sell your services in France and Germany, then your representative has to be based in one of these countries. You can't just choose any EU country. If you don't have business there, then that's not an appropriate place to have a representative. So it will be something that relocation companies think about. The good news, and I think this would apply to most UK DSPs, is that the requirement for an EU rep does not apply, and I'm quoting here, if your processing is only occasional and of low risk to the data protection rights of individuals. So it's really only where you're selling directly into the market. But if you get the occasional case coming from Germany or France, you would not be affected by this legislation. And incidentally, the UK is going to be introducing a similar requirement. So if somebody is selling into the UK marketplace, they again will need to have a representative in the UK. So it's a kind of reciprocal thing that some European firms may need to think about as well. But if it's occasional, it's not a problem. If you're selling to companies, it's not a problem. It's only if you're selling into individuals.
I'll just make a point there, because I mean, for those of you who don't know, Gordon is not only the strategic consultant for legal for the EuRA members, he's also our legal guide. And that obviously the first thing that we would do is have a conversation about the fact that are we as an organization, when we're selling a service, a conference, for example, going to come under that kind of rule? Because if so, I need to know where we base ourselves, preferably Mallorca. But if not, I'm assuming that like for the vast majority of people, it's only occasional data processing, so it will not apply.
That's right. And again, if we started seeing information coming out from the data protection authorities that was redefining, you know, when you needed a representative, and EuRA thought, well, this is going to be necessary, then it's relatively easy. You know, it could be whoever is EuRA president from time to time as long as they're not based in the UK, as long as they're based in the EU, then they could take on that role. So for an organization like EuRA, it's never going to be a real problem. But you could, there will be companies who need to at least think about this, and they should look at the website of the Information Commissioner's Office. That's ico.org, and just check what they say in very practical language, and give examples of when you do need an EU representative and when it's not needed. So that's a good source of information.
A question that's just come through the Q&A, which I will address now because it's very pertinent to this. Could members of an association such as EuRA represent each other?
Yes, I mean, you need to be checking on exactly what obligations you were taking on. If you were, if I was asked to be a representative, I would be, checking the detail of, this is what I have to do. It means that I appear in, for example, privacy notices issued by that company, because it will say, for Germany, for example, if I'm based in Frankfurt, Gordon Kerr, and give my details as our appointed EU representative. So yeah, this might be a way into it. And as I say, this is just something I'm highlighting now. I've had no practical experience yet of this operating, but I'll obviously be very happy to look at it in more detail if it's becoming an issue for EuRA members.
Great stuff. There's another question on this coming through, but Eleanor, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. So recapping then, we talked about an adequacy decision, EU to UK data transfer.
That's right, yeah. The real fundamental hassle if there's no deal, or a deal that doesn't include an adequacy decision, is that companies transferring data into the UK, no longer part of the EU, and therefore you can only transfer personal data if you have model contract clauses in your contracts with the UK receiver of the data. So it just adds a lot of bureaucracy, hassle. You're having to update contracts. So everyone's hoping there will be, as you say, it's called an adequacy decision. And it really just means the EU says the UK is equivalent to the EU for all data protection purposes. And it can flow to the UK just as it flows at the moment. So that's what we're hoping for, but yeah, that'd be a real hassle if it turns out we don't get that.
No kidding. I'm just going to come to this question from Eleanor. Thank you, Eleanor. With regards to GDPR, how should an RMC based in the UK handle a collaboration with an EU-based DSP and the other way around? Obviously, most of the RMCs are HQ'd in the UK. Should the DSP become a representative of the RMC?
No, this idea of your representative is you just have one. So if you are an American company based in the UK, you're selling into the EU marketplace, selling directly to individuals in the marketplace, then you would appoint one EU representative for the whole of the EU. So it's not a case of saying, oh, well, we have a DSP here, there, and there, and we'll make each of them a representative. This is a very kind of technical appointment, and that's why the example is often given. You would appoint a law firm, for example,
right?
Serving of notices and things like that. But we will certainly delve deeper if, having raised it, but no, it's not an intention that you have them dotted around. You just would have one for the whole of the EU.
And just, for everybody listening, with regard to questions like that, don't forget that Gordon moderates and monitors the LinkedIn legal peer-to-peer sharing group. So if you have a question like that and you need an answer, just throw it in there and Gordon will do his very best to answer it. So going back over a couple of things that we talked about before, We talked the last time about British citizens in Europe losing bank accounts that are based in the UK. Has there been any movement on this?
No, other than in a negative way. So, yeah, the banks which are not providing EU-wide banking are continuing to write out to people, notifying them that their accounts and their credit cards will be closed by 31st December. So that is just a sad fact of life, because UK banks have lost their passporting rights, which allowed them to operate in every EU country. If it's coming the other way, incidentally, if it's a European bank, it will be allowed to operate. I think the UK government have had an initial 3-year period, but they are keen to have European banks operating in the UK. But yeah, that sadly is something that is just a bit more complicated now. If you're with, yeah, I think it was Barclays and Lloyds we talked about last time, that there will be other banks that decide, well, we're going to register, or we're going to get licenses in all these different states or some of these states. But it is the fact that, yeah, you need a banking license in each one of the 27 states. That some of them are just saying, no, it's not worthwhile. So yeah, that's a negative.
And I mean, obviously, one of the other fundamentals for EuRA members is right now, EU and UK expats living both sides of the divide are protected under the withdrawal agreement, but that ends very soon.
Yeah. So the idea, yeah, if you are moving to the UK or moving UK to the EU during the transition period, then again, that's fine, up to 31st December. And then 1st January, absolutely all changes. If you are wanting to move from the EU to the UK or vice versa, you will be subject to just the normal immigration arrangements for that country. And in the case of the UK, we have an Australian points-based system.
Yay! So sunny, so nice.
And that simply means that it doesn't really matter whether you're coming from France or Germany or the United States or India or China, you go through that system.
Yeah.
And if you're an employer in the UK that only brought in staff from the EU in the past, and so didn't have to worry about things like sponsor licenses, then from 1st January, if you're bringing in staff from France or Germany, you will need a sponsor license, because again, it's just the same as any other country in the world. So the one exception, incidentally, is we have this common travel area with Ireland. So that is unaffected, because that was never part of our EU arrangements. That, I think, goes back to Ireland becoming an independent country, and whenever in the 1920s or whenever, and we've always had this agreement with allowing UK citizens to travel and work in Ireland and Irish citizens in the UK. So that's the one exception to otherwise free movement goes on 1st January.
Yeah, absolutely. And just recap on the sort of travel impacts for, not necessarily for residency, but for vacations and business.
Yeah, well, the one thing that we'd picked up last time was this new visa waiver system that's coming in, a little bit like the American ESTA. So with Britain being outside the EU, this new system comes in, I think, on 1st January, and you pay €7 it is at the moment for your European travel information and authorization system, and it's valid for 3 years. It allows you to spend up to 90 days in any 180-day period.
Okay.
But it doesn't allow you to work or to study. That would still require a specific visa. So this is really just for tourism. Or I guess attending EuRA conferences.
Exactly. And staying for 3 months afterwards, because it's in a particularly fantastic location. And I mean, we've talked about this before. Just to say, Elisa, Robert, I'm going to come to your questions, I promise. So the relocation of financial jobs out of the City of London, there's been a lot of speculation about that, and I know you've looked into that. Can you go into that for us?
Yeah, so again, last time we were talking, it was really on the basis of, well, there have been a few thousand jobs certainly have been lost in London, but a trickle compared to the, some of the projections, and you'd have to say these came from Remain, from the Remain campaign. So while we like to point at some of the promises made by the Brexit side of the argument, there were some exaggerations on the other side too. And I remember reports that London itself would lose about 100,000 financial services jobs. So there have been a few thousand losses. I was just checking the latest figures. There were one or two interesting things. One that came from the Wall Street banks. At the moment, if you're working for a major Wall Street bank, then 90% of these people who are in the EU are in London. And the projection is that between now and let's say the end of next year, that proportion will drop to about 80%. So, there are changes afoot. There's a drift away from London rather than a flood. And another one I saw, a current thing, is that Morgan Stanley, they currently have 800,000 square feet in their London HQ. They're looking for a new HQ, and they're saying that will only be 600,000 square feet. So they're reducing their requirement by 25% in London. Now, to add to the complication of how do you analyze that kind of statistic, that is a combination, of course, of COVID-related, homeworking. It's not just saying, oh, we're moving these jobs to Paris, Frankfurt, and Luxembourg. It's also the fact that more people will be working from home. And, if you're a cynic about these things, it has to be said that the UK government may be quite happy that a lot of the economic impact of Brexit will actually be camouflaged, disguised by the COVID-related economic downturn.
Yeah.
So when we try and say over the next year, this is the impact on this industry or on GDP, we don't really know what is the COVID effect and what is the Brexit impact. So that may suit the UK government.
A good day to bury news, I think, is the phrase, isn't it? Very interesting. Robert Fletcher asks, what's your view of Unilever bucking the trend and setting up its full entity in the UK and not in the Netherlands?
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. We're talking about trends here, but for individual businesses, the decisions can be quite different. They may decide that being part of the UK stock exchange rather than listed somewhere else is an advantage, and therefore they, given a choice between, in this case, the Netherlands and the UK, there may be specific reasons for selecting the UK, and Brexit is just irrelevant to that. And I think there will be lots of examples like that. And I mean, another more general thing is that when you're relocating investment bankers around the world, London has always been seen as somewhere that has many attractions. So not just the business attractions, but for individuals and for families, London is a desirable destination. So, that doesn't change. And if you suddenly start telling people that, no, we're going to move our headquarters to X city in X country, and I better not name names, there could be a backlash. Why would I move my family to that location? So that there will be factors that have nothing to do with Brexit that almost discourage moves out of London, and again, that may be why what we're seeing is a drift, or a trickle even of jobs in hard numbers so far, rather than this kind of torrent that was was predicted. But the problem is, it will be hard again to measure it. Apart from the COVID effect, there's also just the fact that a company maybe from the United States, or maybe considering expanding their London headquarters, now decides, well, it's actually quite convenient to split it, and we'll have something in Luxembourg as well. And it wouldn't show up in the figures. It wouldn't be like job moves from London, but it would be opportunities lost. And you know, there will be a lot of that, I'm sure. But yeah, there will be lots of exceptions as well. And it's not as if London or the UK has suddenly become a bad place to do business. There are
sure.
lots of attractions.
I mean, it's very interesting as well. The topic of work from anywhere, work from home is huge for our industry, over the coming months and years, and how that is going to impact as well. And that's really nothing to do with Brexit, but it could well, shift how companies view where their people are. Elisa Ketty from Helmer in India asks, how will it impact the inflation rate and the exchange rate fluctuations with the euro?
You imagine that these are already built in, in terms of exchange rate. Currency dealers have known that we're coming up to this 1st January switch. I think if there's no deal, I imagine that would definitely affect the pound, because there must be an assumption being built in just now that there will be some kind of deal. So that would be bad news. But in terms of inflation, again, there's a huge difference between no deal and a tariff-free deal. The UK inflation would certainly be affected by no deal. Just the kinds of examples I mentioned earlier, you're suddenly building in tariffs. And while there is an argument you could reduce inflation by, for example, having tariff-free food coming into the UK from all over the world, but then you devastate your own farming industry. Absolutely. So the kind of tariff-free trade we can do with the EU, and we have done for many decades, to just suddenly say we'll have that with the world would, as I say, have a pretty devastating effect on British farmers. So yeah, these things are complicated, but it certainly will be an inflationary pressure.
Yeah, definitely. Just from my own point of view, when we were talking about level playing field, I mean, there's quite a few things I've learned recently from these briefings, and we did one last week on diversification. And Elena Antoniak in Bucharest was saying that Romania has a flat tax rate of 10%, which does not graduate upwards. Now, that's very interesting. And again, we're talking things like working from home or working from anywhere. If you can get the permits to go and work somewhere like Romania, that's not a level playing field.
Yeah, and there always have been voices in the EU that have said, rather than tax being an entirely national issue, we need to have some kind of more EU rules about it. So, for example, value-added tax, there are limits on that.
Yeah.
You have to operate within certain parameters. But on income tax, and I mean, probably corporation tax is the biggest one. Ireland,
yeah,
is successful in attracting head offices, particularly in the IT sector, and that's on the back of very low corporation rates. So yeah, that is an area where, in fact, you could say unfair competition exists in the EU already, but there's always been enormous resistance from individual countries to saying, let's have a uniform tax system. I think that has been a step too far for member states up to now.
It's still, I mean, from that point of view, it's still early days. The union expanded to 25 members, less than 20 years ago. And that's, in the grand scheme of things, that's not a very big amount of time for playing fields to level out, really, is it? Gordon, fascinating. We will pick this up again pretty well as soon as something happens. And we know about it. I mean, the last one we did, I think, Gordon, we put together the one, you put together the briefing on the Privacy Shield coming down as a result of that legal case. So as soon as something happens big time in terms of the agreement or non-agreement, or something falls apart or something comes together, we will do the next one of these. But and I'm fairly confident that will be in the, well, like you said, in the next couple of weeks.
It has to be, I think, absolute latest would be the end of next week. But I mean, literally, you know, we could end this session and there could be an announcement that a deal has been struck. I mean, it could be literally any day now. Yeah.
As soon as we know, we'll reconvene. And Gordon, thank you again for all your insights. Thank you, Marianne. That's very kind of you, Gordon. An entertaining and informative session. It's always a pleasure, Gordon, to spend time with you, even talking about bizarre things like Brexit. But it's happening. Let's hope it happens with a deal. Thank you to everybody who has attended today. I'm sorry that we are not doing this, and I say this every time, in a nice hotel somewhere in a conference room where we can go off now and have a coffee and catch up. But we will at some point. So Gordon, thank you so much. That was terrific. This will be online next week. So no, it won't. Sorry, I will send you the link to the recording tomorrow. So if you want to go over it, or you want to share this with your team or whatever, you will be able to do that. So Gordon, thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for attending. Take care, stay well, and make the best of lockdowns wherever you can, however you can. Bye, everyone.
Bye now. Bye-bye.